I'll spend a few minutes and talk about a few aspects of developing presentations in Kumu that you're likely to find very useful, though are not quite very obvious. There are a set of shortcuts that have been implemented which you can use inside of a presentation, and we've listed them here in a separate element. These are simply a subset of the standard Kumu shortcuts that are available inside of any map. When you create a story, you can simply send that URL to anyone and they can open the presentation. And the format of that URL is your username, kumu.io, and whatever name you assigned to the presentation, so that when they open it, it starts out and says whatever title you gave it, allows them to start and walk through the presentation, though know that when they're in the presentation, they have access to all of the normal modes of unfolding and hiding and showing aspects of the presentation that they had if they were looking at the map itself. So here is by holding and doing a focus here, or focusing on this, or going back to focus on the whole thing, they can do those kinds of things inside of the presentation itself. Personally, I like to go ahead and take that link for the presentation and embed it here in the model itself so that I can send somebody the URL for the model, and the tell me a story is an option here so that they can look at the whole model, or they can click here and it will show the story in a lightbox. I like the lightbox aspect because it maintains the context, so when they're finished, all they do is click and close and they're right back to wherever it was they were before. And it's really easy to do, and it's simply the URL followed by question mark lightbox equals full. If the full isn't applied, it simply uses a smaller lightbox, which may or may not be sufficient. I think it's usually creates something that's too small to be very useful. Now let me go ahead and put this back. Oh, is there? Go back and put the full back on it. Now, when you're actually in creating the presentation itself, let me go ahead and go into this one. Let me edit this. When I'm in the presentation itself, it's important to remember that what you're working with is the actual presentation. So don't delete anything or move things around in relation to each other, because you'll actually end up altering the model that you're creating the presentation from. I found out this the hard way when I had to completely rebuild this. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can unfold a model in here. You can click something and then come down here and say focus equals selected, and I get this loop, and then tell it that I want to zoom to fit. If you want it zoomed to fit, you want to do that as the last thing that you do before you go to the next slide. So because if you touch anything else, then it doesn't remember that you want to do a zoom to fit. So make sure that zoom to fit is the last thing you do before you create a new slide. And then when you go to the new slide, you can click here and bring everything back and say, okay, I want to now go ahead and display this loop. And then I can create another slide and tell it that I want to display this loop. So this is a loop by loop presentation of the model. So it walks through from one loop to the next loop to the next loop. Now, the alternative is that you could actually build the model so that we start on the first slide with this. And then we go to the next slide. We select the background we select everything. We click on this, hold the shift key, and then click on this. And then tell it to focus on selected, so that I've now added the second loop to the first loop, as opposed to simply showing the second loop. And then what I want displayed is this. So now I have the first loop, second loop, and the text from this loop label displayed. And then I go to create a new slide, and what I want is all of this. And then tell it that I want this text displayed. So now in this loop it shows the whole model plus the description from the third loop. What turns out to be a little tricky is if you really want to unfold a loop itself piece by piece by piece. So I can select this, hold the shift, and select this, and then tell it that I want selected. So I get these two pieces of that loop, and I probably tell it that I want to display this text. Then in the next slide, what I really want is the next piece of the puzzle. Now if I click on this, it shows me all of the things also connected to Cry Wolf, but there's no way to turn any of them off. So what you have to do is you have to come back all the way to the beginning, select this, hold the shift key, select this, and then select this, tell it to do selected. So you now get these three pieces, and this is probably the text that you want displayed. So this would be the next slide. And then for the next slide, this gets to be tedious very quickly. I've asked the developers to give me an unview option for pieces of things. So now if I click on selected, I did it wrong. I want this, hold the shift key, do this, this, and this. Tell it that's what I want selected, and this is the text. So now I have those four pieces of the loop on the next slide, and then I would finally, on the next slide, actually go and do the boredom relief loop. Now, just think about doing that for the entire presentation, piece by piece by piece. I think it would drive me crazy, probably drive you crazy too. So, another reason that it really makes sense to include loop labels and document them well so that you can unfold the model loop by loop by loop. And though there may be instances where it makes sense to take a particular loop and unfold the loop piece by piece as opposed to the whole loop. It's a choice based upon what it is that you're trying to present and get across to someone else. So just some aspects of this that I found a little confusing initially, and as I played with it over and over again, it got clearer and clearer. And that's my advice to you is spend time with it, work with it, sort of mow your way through the frustration, and it's a pretty awesome set of capabilities. So take care, see you in the next video. Bye.